Thank you, Father. So, yeah, thanks for having me on. And it's a real privilege for me to give witness and testimony to some of the wonderful things that God in His mercy has done in my life. And as we all know, the word testimony contains the word test. So, for me to have a testimony, that means that I have to have endured some sort of test, some sort of trial in my life. And in many ways, I'm actually thankful for the trials and the challenges and the tests that have come my way, because without them, I would still be living a very selfish, self-seeking, and selfish lifestyle. And look, if you want an easy life, then Christianity is not for you. It's not. But if you want a life of adventure, of where you're going to be living life to the full, and where you'll be realizing this God-given potential that exists and dwells within all of us, then Christianity is certain for you and is certainly for you. And I think one of the greatest tragedies in life is not becoming the man or the woman that God has created you to be. So with that in mind, I'll just begin by telling you a small bit about myself and what life was like growing up for me. I was actually born in London, in England. I'm the middle child of three boys. I was a very active child when I was younger. I was always out with my friends. I played lots of sports. The sport I played the most was soccer. And then in my early teenage years, as Father Luke mentioned, I moved back to Galway here in Ireland. My parents were Irish, and I always considered myself Irish, but we moved back here. And I found this initial move hard to take, because my life was in England, my friends were there and things like that. But it was around this time also then that I started to develop a very difficult relationship with my father. Things became complicated between us. And I suppose in many ways, this made me quite rebellious. So it was around this time then I started to act out. I started making some poor decisions, started to live really carelessly, and I isolated myself from the rest of my family. All I cared about was socializing and trying to prove myself and thinking that I was having a good time. But in this time, I was trying to fill myself with things of the world, because there's this emptiness within me, and I didn't really know what was going on. But when I reflect on my behaviors, I suppose I had a lot of voids and a lot of holes within my heart. And I thought the way I could fill this emptiness was with things of the world. But all it made me do really was feel dead inside. I'm not sure, maybe there's some photos of me there being shown. You can just see by my eyes, the scripture tells us that, the window to the soul is through the eyes. So going by my eyes there, you can see the state of my soul. And, my life by the time my late teenage years came around was pretty chaotic. It was very disordered. And without me even realizing, my decisions were getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And Fulton Sheen uses a great analogy. He calls it like a sense of drift. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. It's like a ship without a rudder, the rudder being the moral compass. If we don't have our moral compass, without us even realizing, we begin to drift slowly but surely. We drift slowly but surely. And before we know it, we're completely lost at sea. And the funny thing is, unfortunately, we don't drift into goodness. Like, I'm not going to drift into holiness if I have no moral compass. But it's very easy to drift into sin. It's very easy to drift into vice. It's very easy to drift into darkness. And that was what my life was like. And I was recently visiting a prison here in Ireland about 6 months ago, and I was speaking to some of the inmates, and I was explaining that sense of drift to one of the inmates, and he summed it up very well. He says, I woke up one morning here in prison recently, and I looked in the mirror, and he says, I actually asked myself, how did my life get to this? He said, where did it all start? Because as we agreed, like, nobody is born bad. And he began to reflect on his own life, and he said, it started by maybe telling a little lie to his mother. Then he tried his first cigarette. Then he went to that party he shouldn't have gone to. Then he tried alcohol. Then he tried drugs. And progressively it got worse until he actually ended up in prison. And we live in an age of addiction. So it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's cash, cocaine, pornography, whatever it is that's out there today. These things take away your freedom and they make you a slave. Take away your freedom and make you a slave. And the quickest way to lose your freedom is to abuse your freedom. And for me at that time of my life, I could never be by myself. I could never be by myself, because being by myself was like holding a mirror up to who I was. And I didn't like who I was. I couldn't sit with my conscience. I was constantly trying to numb myself, constantly partying, constantly, even if it was by myself in the car, I would have the music up to the last, just constantly trying to drown out that inner voice, that inner conscience that gives us a sense between right and wrong. And despite my disordered lifestyle and the way I was living, I actually achieved everything materially that I ever wanted. But as I mentioned, I was really unhappy with myself and my life. And then when I was 20 years of age, I was actually forced to confront myself because I was playing a soccer match one day and I was on the wrong end of a bad tackle. It was a severe injury that I suffered to my leg, and it was so bad that there was actually a risk my leg was to be amputated because it was a compound fracture where the bones come through the skin, and there was complications and there was an infection. And I still remember the surgeon, he came into the hospital bedroom and he said to me, look, Neil, like, it's worst case scenario, we're going to have to amputate your leg here. And for me at the time, like, I was living such a superficial life, really caught up in my appearance and what people thought of me. This news was like a knife to the heart for me. And for the first time in my life, I had to enter inside of myself, because before that, I was living outside of myself. And I had to confront myself and confront this brokenness that was within me. And I was like, man, like, the prospect of losing my leg, it was like a knife to the heart. So I remember the night before one of the surgeries, I was really full of anxiety and fear at losing my leg, and I couldn't sleep. And I did something really, I suppose, out of desperation. My mum has always been a faithful woman. She always prayed for me. She always talked to me about God, but I never took God seriously, and I didn't take her seriously either, to be honest. So the night before the surgery, more in desperation, because I'd run out of options at that stage of my life, I cried out to God and I made this prayer. And I simply said this, I says, God, whoever you are, or whatever you are, if you're real, right? If you're real, show me you're real and save my leg. And if you save my leg, I'll be good from now on. I'll stop doing the things I'm doing and I'll completely change my life. I was trying to make this deal with God, but as soon as I said these words, I was overcome with a peace within myself that I never felt before. And it's hard for me to explain, but it was like God had heard my prayer. And thank God, after 3 surgeries, my leg was saved. And I remember the morning after that surgery, when I was waking up, I don't remember saying this, but my mum told me I said it. But I said to her, Mum, if God saves my leg, I'm never going to miss Mass again. I must have been high on morphine or something, but I said I'll never miss Mass again. But I probably missed Mass the very next Sunday. But I couldn't deny that experience I had when I called out to God kind of in desperation, and I felt at peace. And I did always attribute the fact that my leg was saved to God. I didn't know how or why, I wasn't able to explain it, but I just felt maybe God intervened in my life somehow. But then it was about 6 months later, 9 months later, I had to deal with another tragic event. This was the untimely death of my older brother. Unfortunately, he lost his life like so many people lose their life today in very sad circumstances. He died by suicide. So in the space of under a year, I was learning to walk again. And then I was burying my older brother, and he was somebody I looked up to. He was only 22 years of age. He was only 2 years older than me. And to be honest, because of these two events happened so close together, it filled me with anger. And I vented a lot of this anger towards God, because I was like, why would a good God allow these bad things to happen to me? And even if God does exist, we're done, because God wouldn't allow these things to happen to me. And I was just really, I vented this anger and rage towards him. So I was like, I dismissed completely that experience that I had when I was in the hospital bedroom. But then not long after my brother's death, I rather reluctantly agreed to visit a place called Medjugorje with my mother. It's a Marian pilgrimage site, and I'm sure some of the brothers here have heard of it or visited her. But again, I didn't really want to go, to be honest, but I said out of love for my mum, I would go, because whatever about grief being difficult for me, I think it's particularly complicated for a mother, right? She was the one who carried my brother and gave birth to him. And so out of love for my mum, I went to Medjugorje and I said, right, I'll go, this is fine. And I remember I was on the bus on the way over there, and I was kind of in my own world. And I was with a group, and they were mostly old people in the group, and they began praying the rosary when I was on the bus. And then it kind of hit me. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm stuck with these head balls now for a week in Medjugorje. So anyways, I was in Medjugorje and I was kind of doing my own thing. I was kind of in my own world. I was watching what people were doing, and I was trying to make sense of it. And I was like, wow, like, this is a lot of people in one place, that it's either a lot of people in one place that are completely crazy, or it's true, it's one or the other for me. It's like, and I was like, this is a lot of people, a lot of crazy people, like in one area at one time, So I was thinking maybe it's me that's crazy. But anyway, while I was in Medjugorje, we visited a cenacolo. And those of you who don't know what a cenacolo is, it's where people with addictions go to try and rehabilitate through work, prayer, and community. And while I visited this cenacolo, at the end of the day, the tour that we got, there was a guy giving his testimony, just sharing about the things God had done in his life, just like what I'm doing now. And when this guy was sharing his story, I really began to relate to the things that he was saying and the brokenness and the emptiness that was in his life. And I didn't know what was going on, but when I look back, the Holy Spirit really began to move within me. And I began to wonder when I heard him speak, I was like, man, like that guy has something I don't have. Like, because he had a peace about him I didn't have. This guy, he was an addict. He lived on top of a mountain in Medjugorje. He didn't have anything materially. He lived on divine providence, but yet he had something I didn't have. And I tried so hard at working out my happiness through materialism and through living my life in that way. And this guy had the very thing that I was after. So after he shared his testimony, I approached him. And his name was John. And I says, John, what is it like? How'd you get that like? You know, he had just his peace. He had this peace about him that I really wanted. He goes, it's easy, Neil. He goes, just ask Jesus to reveal himself to you. I was like, oh no, come on. Honestly, be serious there. Like, what is it? What are you doing there? Like, how are you like that? And he goes, no, I'm telling you, Neil, ask Jesus to reveal himself to you. I was like, all right, fair enough. So when I left Medjugorje, I didn't change straight away, but I began to ask these life questions like, why am I here on this earth? And where do we go when we die? And I realized if I got the answer to them questions wrong, then potentially I could get life wrong. And I began to say that prayer that he told me, like I was like, Jesus, reveal yourself to me, you know? About a year and a half after I returned from Medjugorje, I was back doing some light training with my local soccer team here in Galway. And there was a new guy training with us. And I remember the manager said, look, guys, this new guy training with us tonight, make him feel welcome. And as the training session was going on, I was like, man, like, I know that dude. How do I know him? And then it kind of hit me. Who was it? But the guy who gave his testimony in Medjugorje a year and a half previous. I was like, what? So I approached him during the training session. I says, John, I says, do you know me? And he goes, yeah. He goes, how do I know you? I go, I met you in Medjugorje a year and a half ago. He goes, yeah, that's right. He goes, what are you doing here? And I says, I'm from Galway. I go, what are you doing here? And he goes, well, he lived in community, I think, for like 9 years. I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years, maybe something like that. And he said he didn't want to go back to Dublin where he was from. So he came to Galway. He'd walking past the week before, seen these guys training. So he just came down. And when I looked him in the eye that day, I remember it was like 6 in the evening and the sun was setting. When I looked him in the eye that day, it was like his eyes were shining at me. And it's hard for me to explain, but it was like I was looking into the eyes of Jesus Christ. And what was the prayer that he told me a year and a half previous in Medjugorje? He said, Neil, ask Jesus to reveal himself to you. And then Jesus revealed himself to me through the same man in Galway a year and a half later. And I knew from that moment that was not a coincidence. I couldn't explain it. I knew that God had set that up. And so all the doubts and misconceptions I had, they suddenly began to fall, because I was like, oh my goodness, like I was like, God is real. Like I was having a bit of a moment. I was like, this isn't set up. Like I was like, God is real. Like he can actually affect my life right here, right now. I was in a bit of a daze for the rest of the training session, you know. But then I was like, what does this mean for my life? Like God is real, like and he can actually impact my life. And it's a bit of a relief as well, because I didn't have to start controlling my life anymore. One of my late brother's belongings was his Bible, so I began to read the scriptures late at night, and I began reading about this Jesus Christ fella, and he seemed like a serious character, you know, the things he was doing and the things that he was saying. And I got more and more into the scriptures, and the scriptures really began to speak into my heart, and I began to relate my own life to the scriptures, and a lot of peace and a lot of healing started to come in. But I found it difficult, to be honest with you, to try and integrate my old life with these new revelations and the things that were happening for me. I didn't have any Catholic friends. I didn't have any community, so I was trying to do it myself. And to be honest, I found it very, very difficult. And then this is about my mid-20s. In the space of a week, I had a lot of external things, let's just say, happen to me in the space of a week that really, really just basically brought me to my knees. I was really experiencing my own human weakness and my own nothingness. And I was really, really starting to lose hope, because I was really trying to live this Christian life, but I just didn't know how to. And I was really struggling, and I kept falling, and I just didn't know where to go with it all. And I remember then, it was during that week, I was in my bedroom, and I was like, right, I was like, God, I just give up here. I can't do this anymore. I go, I surrender everything to you now because I'm trying to do this myself and it's just really not working out for me. And it was a real heartfelt, raw prayer. I've never met a prayer like it before, I would say, really, really crying out to God. And all I can explain is that I came in contact with a power, I suppose, that I'd never felt before. It's difficult for me to try and explain this experience and put it into words because it was such a spiritual experience that I'm not going to do it justice with words. And I've never really shared this publicly before because it's taken a long time to process actually what happened, But basically, I had a supernatural experience of God the Father. Something kind of broke loose inside of me, and all the barriers, all the question marks, all the misconceptions I had of God, they completely just fell down. It was that complete metanoia experience. I was experienced God as Father like never before. It's like he knew everything about me, and I experienced a love that went through my bones, literally went through my bones. It was the most intimate and personal experience that I've ever felt before. And I was weeping. As I was experiencing this love of God the Father, I was weeping, but they were kind of tears of joy. Tears of joy is what I was experiencing. And from that moment onwards, to be honest, my life completely changed. I had a total change inside of me. And it's ultimately me and my brokenness, experiencing my worthlessness and my nothingness towards God, calling and crying out to him, surrendering my whole life to him. And he met me in such a personal, intimate way that it completely transformed my mind and completely transformed my heart. Romans 12:2 tells us that not to be influenced by the world in which you live in, but instead be transformed through a renewal of your mind. And that's what happened to me. My whole reality changed. The way I looked at myself and the way I looked at others completely changed as well. And after this experience, because of my tragedies in life, because of my brother's death by suicide, and because of the things I had to contend with myself, I went back to university to study to be a teacher, a guidance counselor, and a psychotherapist. And I began working as a guidance counselor in a school in Tala, a job I absolutely loved. I loved working with the students up there and the staff up there. I had a great time with all the teenagers there in Tala. And in my summer months, as you know, one of the benefits of teachers' holidays, I began to do missionary work. So I began to work with the Missionaries of Charity in different missions around the world. They're the congregation that Mother Teresa started. And, we're always told that and taught that we should do good to the poor. But what I learned through my experiences, that it's actually the poor who do good to us. It's completely the other way around. When I was in my first mission trip was in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and I was working in a homeless shelter there with drug addicts and homeless people and a lot of street men. And the sister working there at the time, she taught me such a valuable lesson that I still hold to today. And it comes from Mother Teresa. She said, look, Neil, it's not about doing these big extravagant things when you're here to serve the poor. She says you do the small things with love and you see Christ in everybody. And I was like, all right, okay. And I was actually glad to hear that because it really simplified my idea of living the faith. And one of the days when I was in the soup kitchen, I go, right, I'm really going to try and live this today. I'm going to see Christ in everybody and I'm going to do the small things with love. And I remember a gentleman walked into the soup kitchen. He sat down and I was to give him a bowl of soup. And I said, right, I'm going to pretend that man now is Jesus Christ. And I'm going to hand him this bowl of soup with as much love as I can. And so I was really gearing myself up. I was like, right, trying to motivate myself like it was like All Ireland final day, getting myself going. And anyways, I approached the man. I put my hand on his shoulder and I said to him, look, I go, here you go. This is for you. And he turned around and he said to me in Portuguese, obrigado, amigo, which means thank you, my friend. Again, like the experience I had with John from Chinaklo, when he looked me in the eye, it was like his eyes were shining at me. And I felt a peace in my heart, and my heart began to burn. It was like it was burning with love. And again, it's hard for me to explain, but it was like I was meeting Jesus Christ in this homeless beggar in Rio de Janeiro. It was like it was right there in front of me, in front of my eyes. I know I met Jesus Christ in this homeless man in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And straight away after that, I felt two things that evening. I felt great shame, but great liberation. I felt great shame because I didn't deserve the way that God was pouring all this love into my heart. And I felt great liberation and great freedom because I began to think about all the things I'd done in my life, looking for happiness, looking for joy, looking for peace. And all I did was hand this homeless man, this beggar, a bowl of soup. And I'd never been so full of love in my life. The eyes of the world would have looked at this homeless beggar as a nuisance or as an embarrassment or as someone that we don't need in society. But when he was looked upon with a different set of eyes, he actually revealed himself as a tremendous gift for me, a tremendous gift for me. I suppose one of the saddest experiences that I've had doing the mission work was when I was in Manila in the Philippines. And we were visiting prisons over there. I was working with teenagers that found themselves and young children that found themselves in prison. And one day we visited one of the prisons, and I came across a young boy who was Down syndrome, and he was in prison. So this kind of seemed odd to me. And the prison guards told me that they found this young guy wandering the street by himself. He was a street child. And what they guessed was that he was just abandoned by his mother or his father or his guardian. He was just left on the street by himself. And for his own safety, they brought him into prison. And when I sat next to this guy, I was completely speechless. I was just speechless. And he couldn't, as I said, he couldn't speak. So they didn't know his name. They didn't know how old he was. The only thing he could do was this. He could make an X. So everybody called him X. And when I was sitting next to him, it's like the experience was like, it was like an unspeakable tragedy right before your eyes, right before your eyes. And it was experiences like that that completely softened my heart because, you know, I thought I had it tough growing up. I thought like, you know, I had it really bad and my life was terrible and all the rest of it. And yet then I was thinking of this guy, this Down syndrome street child wandering the streets by himself. And I always bring myself back to this guy when I'm having a hard day, you know. I always bring myself back to that moment. See, when you're serving the poor, you realize that the poor, they have a joy that is pure and it's also contagious because it doesn't come from having material things, nice clothes, a nice car, whatever it is. It comes from the simple fact and the very gift of being alive each day. That's where it comes from. Simply just being alive each day. So as I continue to work in Tala with the teenagers there and continue my mission work around the world with the missions of charity, I had more tragedy come into my life in 2000 and from 2013 to 2014. In the space of 9 months, I had 3 more family deaths. I lost my grandmother. You know, she died. She lived a good life. And then 3 months after that, I lost my first cousin, who also unfortunately died by suicide. He was the same age as my brother when he passed away. You might have heard of him. It was the Galway hurler, Niall McDonagh. And that death was difficult for me because I'd spent a bit of time with him before he passed away. And then 2 to 3 months after that, then my father died of cancer. He lost his battle with cancer. So again, you know, you're just left to deal with the grief. And anybody here that's listening, you know, grief is such a personal and unique thing that it's difficult to even process what's going on at a time like that, isn't it? You know, and but to be honest with you, it was when my heart soared with pain that I felt a closeness and an intimacy with God that I'd never felt before. I knew that he was with me. My pain didn't go away, but I knew that God was with me. I knew he was with me. And at the end of the day, like, you know, grief is the price that we pay for love, because if you love anything or love anyone, you make yourself vulnerable and you leave yourself vulnerable to heartbreak. And if anything, these experiences, as difficult as they were, if anything, they only fueled my faith. And in 2014, I moved to New York. I moved to the South Bronx and I began living and working in a homeless shelter in the South Bronx. And it was because of these experiences that I had in my own personal life and also working, serving homeless people and the marginalized, that I began discerning my vocation to the priesthood. And I suddenly became very aware about how brief this life is in light of eternity, right? Even if I live to 100 years old, life is short. Do you know what I mean? It's still short, but eternity, like, is a long time. And so I suddenly became a lot more aware about where I'm going rather than where I'm living now. And so after a lot of prayer and a lot of discernment, I entered formation for the Archdiocese of New York. And I spent 3 wonderful years in formation for the priesthood. I grew my intellectual life. I loved studying philosophy and theology. I made some great friends when I was there. I also increased in my devotional life. I made friends with the saints. Seminary wasn't without its challenges, but like every vocation or any walk of life, it's going to have its challenges. But after a lot of discernment, just like I felt called to enter seminary, I felt called to leave again. And for anybody listening that might be discerning your vocation, it's one thing to discern on the outside, but for me personally, my real discernment only started when I entered seminary. That's when the real discernment started for me. So I'm still open to whatever God has for me. So I just ask you to please keep me in your prayers as I continue to discern my future and my future vocation. But when I reflect on all my experiences and where the Lord has brought me, I've reflected a lot on the question of suffering. And suffering has always been there, hasn't it? It's been there since the beginning of time. So to eliminate suffering from my life altogether, we can't do that. I can limit the suffering that comes into my life, or we can limit the suffering that comes into other people's lives by looking out for them and looking out for the vulnerable and the marginalized in their communities. But to eliminate suffering altogether, it's just not in my power. So I knew for myself in my journey that true healing wasn't going to take place by me avoiding suffering, but true healing can only take place by me confronting it and accepting it as part of life. And the key in my journey was acceptance and surrender. Accepting that God's ways are not my ways, as it says in the book of Isaiah, and also then surrendering my hurts, surrendering my brokenness, surrendering my emptiness to God the Father and his loving providence. And at the end of the day, I worship a God who suffered. He suffered through his only son, Jesus Christ. When Jesus walked this earth 2,000 years ago, not only was he ridiculed, not only was he spat at, not only was he shamed, he was tortured. But one thing that they couldn't stop him doing was loving. They even nailed him to the cross. They even crucified him. But even up until his death, they could not stop him loving. What did he say when he's being nailed to the cross? Forgive them, Father, for they not know what they do. And that's a perfect model for all of us. And that's a model that I take too. So it doesn't matter what our circumstances are or what's going on in our lives. Nobody can stop you loving. Nobody can stop you loving. So every day when I wake up, I ask myself this. I ask myself, do I follow Jesus Christ or not? And you should ask yourself that too. Do you follow Jesus Christ or not? Because if you do, everything that you do in your day should be oriented towards him. Jesus didn't say, go out and be a really nice guy and mow the lawn. No, he didn't say that. He said, go out, make disciples of all nations. He says, go and heal the sick, set captives free. And I know that my journey is not over. Every day I have to work on my conversion. My journey is not over at all. Conversion means a change of heart. I'm constantly having to look at myself, my faults, any of my blind spots. I have to try and grow in humility. And I continually try and say the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Because that's what I am, a sinner. And I count and need God's mercy every single day. So, brothers, if you've taken anything from my sharing here today, take one thing, that any challenge that you have faced in life won't happen to you to beat you down. But that very challenge that's weighing you down, God will use that to build you up again. I had a concept of God when I was younger that he was in some far off land beyond Mars, beyond the clouds somewhere. God does dwell in heaven, but he dwells in here too. So open your heart and have that conversation with God. Speak to him as you would a loving father, because he asks all of us here this question today: what can I do for you? What can I do for you? Thank you for listening. If any of the brothers or sisters have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, that was look, there's so many huge things that you were hitting on. I The whole time you were saying this, for me this is so crucial because you're Irish and we're missionaries in Ireland, and the fact that you have grown up and you've experienced and you've lived what a lot of Irish boys are growing up in and experiencing right now, this is a massive godsend for our times, because the amount of lads that you come across that you hinted at a father wound. I don't know where to what extent that would be like, but like the guys that I'm coming across in these schools, there's a deep wound there from the father. It's either an absent father, an alcoholic father, a gambling father, a father that's demanding if they don't exceed, or succeed. And that for them is, it's like you were saying, like with the rudder, like for them it really is directing them in a direction. And when they get to like 22, 23 years old, not having a real father in their life, the effects that is having on them is, it's unbelievable. And then you touched on suicide as well, how close you've had that in your life. And from my experience here in Ireland, it's either somebody we know of who's committed it, or somebody we know of who knows somebody, either an uncle, a brother, a cousin, somebody in the immediate family, and to the point where it's almost, the impression I'm getting has become like a norm. It's become like a normal option, the option to take your life. So I'm wondering, like, if there, the connection between the lack of an image of who God really is in these young people's lives, like how many young people have actually experienced God as somebody who's so close to them that he's going to be communicating himself to their hearts in these dark times, that there's no hole that he can't climb down and pick you out of. Or is their image really, I don't know, of some tyrant? Did the image they have of God maybe into something they got from their own father? The distortion of God as this demanding and lawmaker, lawgiver. It's just, it's tragic. And I do see how relevant this is, and the fact that you were athletic as well, because a lot of the lads, sports here in Ireland, it's massive. It's kind of funny how they're going through withdrawals right now, how the GA is not going to be around this year. And, you're seeing the symptoms and the effects of how important sports are actually for these young guys. And the fact that you were just like a Joe Schmo, like from what I remember, you had some Premier League scouts looking after you. I could be wrong, but you kind of just, let that go under the rug. But like the lads that see that, it's like, this guy's no slouch. He really was serious in the sports. And soccer, like you got the GA, but then like soccer is something, you can get paid for. It's all the chicks dig a good like soccer player. It's like, the dream that they might have of what that actually is, you going down that road, and that Ignatius moment, you're kind of like, you get knocked off your high horse. He got a cannonball. He literally got nutmegged by a cannonball. Actually, if you think about it, he had a cannonball hit both like his knee, and then it went right through his leg. So he got this divine nutmeg that humiliated him and sent him on a stretcher and a sick bed for months. And that's where he picked up literature, and that's where he had his actual conversion. And it kind of makes me think maybe sometimes God has to break some hearts just to get into him. Sometimes he has to like break plans, break ideas, these concepts that we have of life, so that he can actually come in, because if not, there's no other way. But I mean, look, it's the stuff that you're touching on, I think, is so relevant and so important. But look, I know it's all over the place, but just what would you say to a young guy right now, like, because we do have some subscribers, a lot of them that are here in Ireland. Maybe they haven't had that real contact with our Lord. Maybe they have a bad concept of God, and you coming from the world, being really, like a popular guy, sporty, what would you say to this 18-year-old guy who's basically, maybe he has sports as everything, and it might be pulled out from under him? Or what would you say to him, like, to give him a better image of religion and God?
Right. Well, like, yeah, no, it's a good question, because like, it's like, where are you finding your identity? So if someone's identity is in sports, for example, if someone's playing GAA, hurling, soccer, whatever it is, and you get a serious injury and your sport is taken away, well, then who are you then? You get what I'm saying? Because your whole identity is being tied up in this one thing, that even one day it's going to come to an end one day, either through an injury or you're just going to get too old to play anyway. So you see that with a lot of retired sports players in the NFL, in America, NBA, that when they come to the end of their careers, they're having massive breakdowns because their whole identity was tied up with the sport itself, And I suppose it comes back to this whole thing of realizing that, life doesn't make sense until you find your identity in Jesus Christ and in God as Father. And a lot of people say to me, like, Neil, you've had all these mad experiences of God. That doesn't happen for me. You know what I mean? And it's a valid question. But I was so hard-headed, so hard of heart, so selfish, stubborn, that God really had to just knock me over the head to get my attention, to be honest with you. But it's not, these experiences aren't particular to me. Anyone can have these experiences of God as a loving Father. If you really do earnestly seek God as Father, and I say this many times, He will reveal Himself to you. He will. Maybe not in the way that you think or in the means that you think, but he will reveal Himself to you. To think why I held back for so long was I didn't believe that God could make me happy. Like if you look at Christianity and you go into these old churches, they're empty, they're full of old people, and you're like, and if you say if you looked at a rave and it's full of people, it's got lights, it's everyone's going mad, there's drinking, and it looks like everyone's having fun. It's like, well, that's where the fun is at. And it's like, no, everything I was looking for was in that big empty church. It was in the tabernacle. It was where it is in the Blessed Sacrament, where Jesus Christ is actually dwelling. Everything I was looking for, but yet at the same time, it would have been the last place I would have looked. I think, to be honest with you, Christianity must be the best kept secret in the world. But just getting back to that whole idea of God as Father, that day when I was in my bedroom, I experienced an intimacy and a love that I can't even put into words. And sometimes when we're having days, we think, oh, God doesn't really know what's gone on in my life in this detail or that detail. Like it was just all revealed to me in such a vivid, practical, and tangible way that God knows every last thing about me, everything. And He's not there to chastise me. He's not there to put me in my place, but He's actually there to love me as a loving Father. So the concept of God being a loving Father is very foreign to people. It's very foreign to people. Yeah. So, like as Mother Teresa says too, like if you want to change the world, it does start at home first of all. So before, and even for myself, like before you go out and trying to serve other people, I have to look at my relationships around me at home. Like, how is my relationship with my parents? How is my relationship with my brothers? Am I holding any unforgiveness? Do I have to make amends in any way? So I think it starts there. But in terms then of actually doing these works of mercy, I think that's what you're alluding to, is in going out doing these corporal works of mercy. Well, there's always ways that you can get involved. There's certain places, and you can get involved here in Ireland with the Simon community. The Missionaries of Charity are here. But then obviously there's other missions that are overseas as well. But I think that's about as well. We're all called to do corporal works of mercy. But that's about finding your charism as well, Jack. Charism being that gift that God has gifted you with a certain thing that will be natural to you. It's like when a duck is in water, it looks very natural, doesn't it? Because the duck is, it's in its natural habitat. But if you put a duck on land, it looks completely out of sorts. You can't walk properly. And that's what the charism is like. When we're in the proper environments where we're called to be, then it'll be very natural for life. It'll be very natural for us. We'll be like ducks in water as such. That's why people who are considering religious life, that might look at the Dominicans or, for example, the Franciscan Friars of Renewal. You look at their charism and the work that they're doing, and you kind of fine tune it that way.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Would you say that, like, I mean, Jack's question did spark a question for me, because maybe not a lot of people would have the opportunity to go to South America, or like these places going to transform you. Like that whole thing of them doing something to you is 100% true, and I think we can all say that, all of us who have been on missions. If you do them with us, you're not going to pay a penny, just your ticket, just a little plug in there, because we'll give you room and board, and it really is life changing. But as far as those people who won't be able to get out there, what would you say to, like, I think you might have just answered there with Jax, but I'm thinking of young people that because I think for me, like, a big part of, like, let's go to these Catholics that are already Catholic, right? So we're not talking about people who need this wake up call, like this Jesus smack. All right, let's talk about the Catholics that are like, they're going on retreats, they're going to Mass on Sunday. What would you, if they're listening right now and they want this like fire, they want this experience, what would you say to them as far as like this giving of your faith so that you can actually receive? You know what I'm saying? Like, how when you share your faith with somebody, or you give it, you actually find out that it grows and it becomes more relevant and real. What would you say to somebody that's listening now that is a Catholic, but they're kind of just like shut off, or they're not really on fire?
What I realized was, and look, it was all in Providence that I was able to do these mission trips, because I worked in education, I worked in the school, so I had 3 months off paid every summer, and so it felt like I was going doing this missionary work and getting paid for it, and I would come home after each mission trip completely rejuvenated completely with fire inside of me, because my whole concept of going out to serve them was completely blown to smithereens. Like it was them that were serving me in many ways. You think you're going to minister to them, but it's they who are ministering to me. That whole thing. But for someone who is, I suppose, in Ireland and doesn't have the opportunity to be able to go on mission trips, and I think there's other ways to be able to serve. There's other ways to be able to live that out, so to speak. A lot of people used to look at my mission work and say, "Oh, it's great. You're helping so many people." And I'm like, "No, like, man, you don't understand. It's completely the other way around." But then also then not to limit it like it's just social work. Like, I'm doing this work because I love God. Do you get what I'm saying? And the people that I'm serving, I try and pretend that they're like Christ. They're people that are disguised as Jesus Christ, and I'm trying to meet them. As difficult as it can be sometimes. Like, not all my experiences, like I mentioned there, are as dramatic and as nice as that. Like, if you're working with, for example, on the missions with homeless people and drug addicts, they can be difficult. It can be difficult atmospheres and situations that you find yourself in, because there's a different spirit at work there. A lot of these guys are living on the street and they're doing things that are not of God. So it's not all kind of roses all the time. But just to get back to your question, I suppose, Father, like, if you don't have the opportunity to go away, I think, like what I said there to Jack, I think mission starts at home first and foremost, and with my relationships with my friends. How many of them are disordered? Do you know what I mean? I really have to look at, even if, for example, like, or in my relationship with my mother, if there was something wrong, even if I thought, this is just hypothetically speaking, even if I thought that she was 90% in the wrong, even if there's 10% that I've done wrong, I need to take ownership of that. You know what I mean? I really have to take stock of how I'm living. Likewise for yourself, Father, I think one of the fruits of living in community is that you probably have a mirror held up to yourself all the time, in the sense of, you're bouncing off each other all the time. So it's a constant occasion or a constant opportunity to try and grow in virtue in that way.
Let's go to an anonymous question here in the sidebar. On your bad days, Neil, how do you keep the motivation to pray? You seem so strong, and it comes across like you never have bad days. Thank you, from anonymous.
I wish I didn't have bad days. No, trust me. No, trust me. I have these kind of, like, it's the spiritual life. I have desert days where it's not every day I feel like consolation and I'm walking on clouds. Trust me, it's not like that at all. I do have days where, days of desolation, but I think they're the days. I think God is working more in you during the days of desolation than He is in the days of consolation. And I've kind of learned that myself in my own journey with the Lord, and as I walk in the spiritual life, which I'm constantly kind of learning and growing. But especially in the days of desolation, I always make a point to give thanks and praise to God. I always make a point of giving thanks and praise to God. I don't feel like doing it. And I even say that in my prayer. I was like, God, the last thing I want to do now is give thanks to you. The last thing I want to do now is praise you, because I feel like crap. I feel like rubbish. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it's that whole concept of, all right, our idea of God. Like, I shouldn't have an idea of God as like some ATM machine that I just put my card in and He fills me up with this consolation or this joy all the time. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I serve and love God anyway, just the fact because I exist and that He's given me life. So yeah, no, especially on the bad days that I have when I'm in desolation and I'm going through a real dry period, I really make a point of spending extra time in prayer and also giving thanks and praise to God, not only for the good things in my life, but even I give Him thanks and praise for the desolation that I'm going through.
I've got a question for you. You can just respond. It's more of a reaction. I want to see your reaction to this. But I know of a priest just recently, and he publicly said this, and he's pretty high up. He's not very high, but he's pretty high up, and he said that he was over, I think, 30 years in the missions in the Amazon, and he was basically bragging that after 30 years he didn't baptize one person. And the context of this was that he felt that he was really respecting their beliefs and the originality of their spirituality. So, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with like the great missionaries, the Jesuit missionaries like St. Francis Xavier, or any of the other Franciscan missionaries that went over to the Americas. what would your reaction be to that? Because I really see that you do have a missionary spirit. It's you're drenched in it. Like you have this, like you can't hide the fact that you really you have this heart for the poor. You have this heart, and you have the gift of the actual fact that you've seen Jesus in these people is a grace in itself. So like the duck in the water analogy, I'm kind of seeing you like your water as the missions. But what would your reaction be to that of you know, like a priest who's, this is just recently a couple months ago, that statement, because a lot of people actually have heard that same statement.
To be straight with you, it's a pointless mission then, to be honest with you. Because like if you there's one thing about respecting, like the gospel is not there so we can respect it. The gospel is there to challenge. Do you get what I'm saying? And Christianity is there to challenge. Like it's what I said at the start of my testimony as well, Father. Like if you want an easy life, then Christianity is not for you. It's not. But if you want a great life, then Christianity is for you, where you're going to be living your life to the fullest. So it doesn't, in terms of mission work, you know, bringing someone into the kingdom of God through their baptism and not giving them the opportunity to do that. Well, I see that as a pointless mission, to be straight with you, Father, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree. I just wanted to get that fire to spark out again. Calling us from Texas, so this is great. Were you frustrated when you discerned out of being a priest for the Archdiocese of New York? That's the first question. He's got 3 questions here. How do you deal with the frustration, if there is any, that a company is not having a set rooted vocation like the priesthood? And the third, do you feel like you are ready to start a lifelong work, but you are being asked to stand and wait? Thank you.
No, I wouldn't say it was frustration, because, you know, I felt like, in terms of discernment, I felt a peace to enter and I felt a peace to leave again. But obviously on a human level, I'd met some great friends. I had some great networks, some great priest mentors in general. And my whole idea of Christianity and Catholicism changed from my experience of the church in America, to be honest with you. The Lord really detached me from Ireland, from my way of thinking. There's a whole, it was like the soil of my heart became more fertile. That's what was going on within me. So I wouldn't say that I was frustrated, that I ended up discerning out. On a human level, I was disappointed because I'd met a lot of friends and I had a lot of networks over there. But that's just on a human level. I suppose if there was a bit of frustration, maybe because I think like, it's like, right, you know, you're just on a human level, it's like, right, Lord, I want my mission. Do you know what I mean? It's like, give me my mission. And it's like, well, it's not here now. It's like, all right, fair enough. So there might have been a small bit of frustration there, because it's like you think that you're on track with something, but then he's kind of bringing you off to somewhere else, like, you know. But I do believe it's all part of his providence. Like all my experiences that have happened, they have all been a preparation for whatever it is God is going to call me to. Do you know what I mean? It's not like you go in, start something, and then you leave, or you gave up, or because that people have that idea, I suppose, of when you're entering seminary, it's like, oh, you gave up or whatever. It's like, no, I'm journeying with the Lord here. This is a very personal thing where I'm journeying with the Lord and I'm accountable to Him.
I just want to wrap it here with just a last thing. From what I'm getting of this, and I think everybody else can, is that your mission is you have to show the world, a world that has been very injured and afflicted by this father wound, which I think is at the heart of I personally believe it's at the heart of everything. You take out the father of society and the family crashes. The woman also goes into an identity crisis. And now we have this rise of like the woman has to be like the man. Where is the man? Where is the father? And like, I think your mission for me is as clear as day, is to bring back this image of who the father is. And once we get grounded again in who is this father who is behind everything, we will receive first our manhood, you know, as men, and then our fatherhood, because as men, we're all called to be fathers, whether it be a priest or father of a family. We are all called to be fathers, and we receive that identity in God the Father. So your mission is so providential. It's so important. And as obviously a repayment, or like a thanksgiving for you coming on and sharing, you know, you definitely count with not only our prayers, but the prayers of everybody who's listening, because we really do need you out there and active, because your voice has to be heard, because it's not yours anymore. You know, after you've been touched by the divine gardener, like, you have to go out and work. and you have to go out and show everybody what he's done to you, what he's changed in you, because it's no longer your story. It's his story. It was what he's done in your life. And I think for me, it's massive. And I think we all just have to, praise God. And I am praying that you get in that channel and you get locked into where you have to be locked in, so you can just go off like a rocket and just take as many as you can with you, because that's what he wants. He wants these instruments. So look, once again, thanks a million, and prayers, and all you boys out there, that are listening to Niall. This isn't just his thing. And what really frustrates me, you did touch on this, is that when people see, you had this crazy experience, first of all, you're so far off into the bad end, and then you come into the good end, and I've always just been kind of normal and just going down the normal path, never done anything crazy. It's only for you, or how can it only happens to you? But you nailed it when you said that God wants this to happen to every single one of us. And if you have to remember, the prodigal son did go off in debauchery, and he came back and he got spoiled rotten. And the younger son didn't go off in debauchery, and he could have been spoiled rotten, but he never knew what the father's hug was like. He never had that one-on-one contact with the father. He never knew the father, even though he had lived with him his whole life. And that was the father's complaint. You've been with me this whole time. Everything that is mine is yours, but you've never come up to me and asked me. You've never had this intimate conversation with me. So he's the one who actually loses the most. So all of you guys are out there who have grown up in this cradle Catholicism, and you've been with the Father the whole time, but you've never had this crazy experience, ask yourself if you really do know the Father, and if you really know who this God is that really wants to enter into your life, and make the decision. Maybe there's something that you have to give up that you don't want to give up, and that he's waiting for you to give up so that he can enter in.